Hi, I'm Rob Taylor, author of the article you are currently reading, or if you're viewing this on YouTube, link should be in the description below. Welcome to another post-processing walkthrough. This you should recognize as the final image from the sequence of shoot images. It should be just above in the article. And if we move over into Photoshop, then you can see the raw adjustments in Camera Raw 8.2. If we quickly cover what I've done in here, it's nothing too complex. I've cooled the temperature of the lights down a fair amount, by about 1200 Kelvin or so. This is to provide a good color contrast, complementary colors with the skin tones of the model. I dropped the contrast slightly because these edges of the smoke, some of it was getting lost into just a sort of muddy black area, like around here and stuff. I also decided that I kind of liked the top of the blinds showing through from the studio windows. They sort of had a gantry look to them. I know I said earlier in the article that I was trying to avoid that, but they just added a subtle detail to the shot that I rather liked. I did crush the blacks anyway, just to make the smoke and the light stand out more, basically, and remove any of the messy details around the corners and on the floor that I didn't want to see. Boosted the clarity by quite a lot just because I liked the look and I thought it worked with this image. Increased the vibrance in order to make the slightly blue color of the lights go quite blue, as if there were real gelled spotlights. And the only other thing I did was add a bit of grain, because graininess is sort of a quality that I associate with dark performance stage photography, due to the speed of the film or sensor setting. So I'll cancel that. I imported that as a smart object just so I could go back and change any of those settings, but I didn't need to in the end, so that's fine. And now we're into Photoshop and my usual ridiculous number of layers, which I will now start going through in roughly the order that I put them in, so you can see the process. First is the retouch. I always start with this because that way the adjustments that I'm applying over the top of it are uniform, and sometimes when you start retouching adjustments, then they don't quite mesh with the rest of the image and they stand out. So always retouch first. It's quite simple, just removing the obvious edges of the softboxes here and here, and removing this wire, the sync wire between the two lights. That should really have been looped round back behind these V-flats in the back here, but for some reason I didn't do that, so I had to do it the hard way. Next thing I did was, I didn't really like this big black area. I don't know why the smoke didn't want to go there, but I decided that it needed to, so I added it in right here. That way the image is more balanced left to right. You have the two lights either side, you have the model here, you have the mic stand here, and then the smoke is fairly uniform around all of it. Next was hue saturation. Because I turned the vibrance up in RAW, I made the shadow areas in the skin slightly too red, So I just knocked those down slightly. Next was the fun part. I added the beams of light in. As you can see, even though it's going through smoke, the only real beams you can see are around this snooted speed light up here. These ones, because they were coming through a softbox first and there were no snoots or grids on here, it wasn't really directional enough to force the beams to come through. So I add those in post. I love the look of beams. I add them to any picture where I can get away with it, really. I just love that look of visceral light. And next is the dodge and burn. While the beams were technically part of the dodge, I just decided to do those on a separate layer so I could adjust them separately without damaging any of the actual real dodge and burn, which didn't actually turn out to be much of an issue because there wasn't really a lot to do. Boost the highlights on the face slightly, just to give that slightly higher contrast, grittier look that tends to come from stage lights. Increase the brightness on this arm because this spotlight up here, adding these beams to it, made it look brighter, and the amount of highlight on that arm like that doesn't seem to be quite enough to realistically reflect how bright that light would have to be in order to look like that. I also brightened this arm up right here because it was getting lost in the shadow from this shoulder and arm here. Obviously the beauty dish beam is coming down this way, so I had to add the brightness back in there. It gets a little bit muddy and noisy, but it doesn't look too bad once you zoom out to a normal size. And the burn, done in exactly the same way, using curves adjustment layers, which I pretty much always use now because they're adjustable after the fact. Basically, I prefer non-destructive editing wherever possible. Again, not really a whole lot going on. Just toning down areas that I considered slightly distracting from this area right here, which is where I want the eyes of the viewer to be focused. After I'd done all of this and pretty much finished the image, I then decided that actually I didn't like this expression because it doesn't really look real. It doesn't look like she's actually singing or doing anything. So I went back to an image from earlier in the shoot which didn't have as good a background as this, but had a much better expression, and I put it in. That looks absolutely absurd, so I used this hue saturation layer right here to desaturate. That's all it is, just desaturation, so I could look at the density of the highlights and the shadows and the midtones up here, and use this curves adjustment clipping layer right here to blend it in with the original image a little bit closer. It still doesn't quite look completely right because the angle of this face and the angle of the original head aren't quite the same, but it's close enough that someone viewing it who didn't know that it was a composite, I don't think would notice particularly. So then I came back out of that, added all those layers back in, and that was the result. I could maybe have gone further, but I didn't really want to go completely over the top. I wanted it to stay somewhat grounded in some kind of reality, so I just left it at the beams and the face replacement. So yeah, that's it, final image, and now I'll dump you back in the article.